Truman Burbank is an insurance salesperson living a perfect, calm life on Seahaven Island. Little does Truman know, he's actually the star of the most popular live TV show ever. The whole island of Seahaven is fake, a giant set enclosed by a huge dome that creates realistic skies, weather, and temperatures. Near the coast of Florida, the dome is operated by a large hidden crew and managed by the creative and eccentric director, Christof. Christof has filmed Truman since before he was born, seeing the project as a beacon of hope, showing a person's life non-stop while preserving their innocence. On day 10,909 of Truman's life, things start to change. As he gets ready for work, he greets his neighbors with his usual good morning. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, before a strange object falls from the sky near his car. When Truman looks up, the sky is clear, giving no explanation for the object, which is clearly a studio light. Driving to work, the radio says an aircraft lost parts over the island, making Truman think that's what the fallen object was. At work, Truman secretly rips pieces of paper from a magazine and hides them, then calls directory information for Fiji. He asks for a Lauren or Sylvia Garland. When neither name has results, he hangs up just as his boss, Lawrence, asks him to close a deal on Harbor Island. Reluctantly, Truman leaves, but his fear of open water makes him go back to work once he reaches the pier. At home, Truman gardens before his wife, Meryl, comes home with a cheerful smile. Later, he talks to his longtime friend Marlon, real name Louis Coltrane, sharing his desire to leave Seahaven, quit his job, and go to Fiji, reflecting a childhood dream to explore, even though his teacher tried to discourage him by saying there was nothing left to discover. Marlon pretends not to know where Fiji is. That night, Truman sits alone on the beach, remembering a boat trip with his dad when he was a kid, asking to stay out at sea a bit longer. His dad agreed, but a big storm came, and his dad was swept overboard and drowned. Coming out of the memory, rain starts falling on Truman, just on him. Realizing this, he stands in shock as the whole sky opens up with rain, making him run home. Truman tells Meryl about wanting to go to Fiji, but she rejects the idea, saying they have more important financial stuff to handle. When he says it could be an adventure, she counters by asking if having a baby would be a good adventure. She suggests they go to bed. The next morning, while driving to work, Truman sees a homeless man who looks just like his dad. But before he can reach him, lots of people and weird obstacles suddenly appear, and the homeless man is taken away. Later, Truman asks his mom about it over the phone, but she doesn't believe him and says it's just wishful thinking. That night, Truman goes to his home's basement and looks through an old trunk filled with personal stuff. He finds a red sweater with a white pin saying "How will it end?" Memories take him back to college, where he and Marlon are in the homecoming band. Truman is attracted to a young woman across the courtyard but gets distracted when Meryl shows up. For the next month, Meryl sticks to Truman until one night while studying in the library, he sees the young woman again. He talks to her and learns her name is Lauren, but she says she can't talk to him. Despite this, Truman asks if she'd like to go out sometime. She writes now on a piece of paper and hands it to him. They secretly leave the library together. The cameras lose them for a moment but catch them exiting nearby. Truman and Lauren run to the beach for some privacy. But a car approaches, and Lauren panics. She tells Truman her real name is Sylvia and tries to reveal the truth about the show as her dad appears and calls for her. He collects her, telling Truman she's delusional and saying they're moving to Fiji. Truman watches in confusion as they drive away, never to return. He finds the red sweater Lauren/Sylvia left behind. Returning from his memory, Truman takes the magazine scraps he tore out at work and shows that he's been making a collage of a woman's face, Lauren/Sylvia's face as he remembers it. The next day, while driving to work, Truman's car radio weirdly broadcasts his every move, which are actually comments from crew members watching him. Feeling paranoid, Truman chooses to walk outside. He enters a building and goes to the elevator. The doors open, revealing not an empty car but what seems like a studio with people wearing headphones and eating sandwiches. The actors break room. Before he can understand what he sees, security grabs and pushes him out for trespassing. Baffled, Truman goes to a market and sees Marlon's service vehicle. He tries to explain what happened, but Marlon dismisses it as a joke. Truman tells Marlon he's his best friend and plans to leave for a while. At home, Truman finds Meryl and his mom looking at old photos. They watch an old film called Show Me the Way to Go Home, reinforcing the idea of never leaving home. Truman spots a wedding photo with Meryl's fingers crossed, implying she didn't marry him truthfully. The next day, Truman tries to book a flight to Fiji at a travel agency, but there are no available flights for a month. When he tries to take a bus to Chicago, It breaks down before leaving. Meryl finds Truman in the car, fixated on something. He tells her to be quiet and predicts the appearance of people on the street as if on a schedule: a lady on a red bike, a man with flowers, and a vintage Volkswagen Beetle with a dented fender. Meryl is concerned, but Truman tests his theory further. He drives off with Meryl, who wants to go home. At a rotary, a traffic jam appears. Truman pretends to be disappointed, circles the rotary, and the cars vanish. He heads for the only bridge off the island but stops, scared of water. He closes his eyes, hits the gas, and makes Meryl drive. Truman celebrates as Meryl tries to convince him to go home. They pass a forest fire sign, and flames shoot across the road, but Truman continues. They're stopped near a power plant that seems to have had a meltdown. Men in hazmat suits approach, apologizing for the inconvenience. When one accidentally calls Truman by his name, he tries to escape but is captured and returned to the island. Back home, Meryl tries comforting a disheartened Truman by offering a new drink she got. However, she advertises it like a commercial, leading Truman to question who she's talking to. Upset, Meryl blames Truman's recent behavior, but he grows frantic, insisting something's wrong with everything. Frightened, Meryl grabs a peeler and threatens Truman, who disarms her and puts her in a hold. She cries for help, and a shocked Truman releases her, demanding answers. Marlon shows up, acting casual, and Meryl runs to him, sobbing that it's not professional. Marlon takes Truman outside, where they sit by a road, drinking beers. Marlon tries assuring Truman that if everyone was part of a huge plot, he'd be in on it too. He says he'd never lie to Truman, but in reality, Christof feeds him lines through an earpiece. Marlon reveals the real reason he came. A mysterious figure emerges from the mist, and as he gets closer, Truman recognizes him as his father. They embrace while Christof directs the scene from above, reveling in his master shot of Truman's tearful joy. Truman's father vows to make up for lost time. Shortly after, a weekly TV show called True Talk starts, with a smaller screen showing Truman eating breakfast. Christof is interviewed and explains the show's various events. Killing Truman's father at sea was meant to instill a fear of water, preventing Truman from wanting to leave the island. This decision was reinforced by Truman's childhood desires to explore, which almost led him to discover his captivity. Bringing his father back now aimed to ease Truman's emotional turmoil and keep him on the island despite recent events. Several security measures were taken, including addressing an incident where a Truman fan hid in a childhood Christmas present to get airtime. The individual on the call is recognized as Sylvia, who confronts Christof about holding Truman captive in a fabricated existence. Christof counters that the real world is its own prison, and he has provided Truman with a peaceful life devoid of violence and suffering. He also adds that if Truman uncovers the truth, he has the freedom to leave. The following day, Truman appears to have returned to his usual self, greeting his neighbors and encountering a new colleague, Vivian, Meryl's designated replacement for Truman's potential female companion. That night, Truman seems to reorganize his basement and falls asleep beneath the covers on a makeshift bed. After a long period of inactivity, Christof becomes suspicious while watching the video feed. He orders a phone call to the house, but when Truman doesn't react, Christof sends Marlon to investigate. Marlon discovers a noise-making device and an opening in the basement floor, leading Christof to take the extreme measure of cutting the transmission. The world is left in shock as the transmission ceases, and Christof commands the staff to find Truman. He orders the sun to rise to aid in the search. After an exhaustive land search, Christof proposes searching at sea. Cameras locate Truman on a sailboat, however, none of the actors are capable of sailing to retrieve him. Christof employs his weather system to generate a storm, intending to force Truman to return to land. Truman withstands the storm, shouting in defiance at the heavens. Infuriated, Christof amplifies the storm, almost causing Truman to be thrown overboard. Recognizing Truman's unwavering determination, Christof halts the storm. Truman sails on until his boat collides with the sky, reaching the edge of the dome. He discovers a staircase leading to an exit door. As Truman reaches for the handle, Christof addresses him directly for the first time ever. He introduces himself as the architect of Truman's life, revealing that his existence has been nothing more than entertainment for a world outside. Christof attempts to persuade Truman to remain in his controlled world, where he can live a happy, pain-free life, insinuating that Truman is still deeply afraid of facing the unknown. Truman seems lost in thought, and Christof prompts him to speak, reminding him that the whole world is watching. Truman gazes upward and says, "In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night." He bows, leaving Christof astonished, opens the door, and exits. Overjoyed, Sylvia leaps up from her living room floor and departs her apartment, while the rest of the world erupts in cheers, celebrating the conclusion of the Truman Show. Feeling a mix of sadness and resolve, Christof takes off his headset and terminates the transmission.